growing up, when you got to Paris, did you feel Syrian? Did you feel American? Were you confused? How did you feel?
So I was so I was it was such a culture shock that I'm writing a whole book about it. Basically, it's I mean here I am, this like 6 year old who barely speaks French with Syrian parents, born in the U.S., sort of semi raised partly in Algeria in North Africa, and then I end up in this French school in a chic Paris suburb called Neuilly-sur-Seine, where I felt out of place. I didn't look like the other kids. I felt like I didn't dress like them. I didn't sound like them. I certainly didn't come from the same background, the kind of white French
BCBG.
Catholic type of background. Very, yeah. I mean, I came from privilege, but from a completely different part of the world. Privilege in the sense
Yeah.
that my parents had the money to travel and they had the money to get an education and they were engineers and lawyers and the rest of it. But I still felt like a complete outsider. And when you're that age and you feel that foreign to everyone else, it's traumatic. And it was traumatic for many years. And it took a very long time for me to feel like I belonged anywhere, which is why I think this idea of then writing about it became so important to me and so cathartic, because through that I've come to terms with maybe more who I am, and also I'm hoping others will find in some ways their story reflected in mine.
I wanna move on, Hala, to look at your actual journalism career and what the industry means to you. What you obviously chose it as a career very consciously. You were very young. You made that choice as a young woman, and you followed through, and it became your clearly your passion, and it took you to big heights. What did it mean to you then, and how has that meaning changed over time?
Well, what it meant for me then was, look, when you it's a very competitive field. So when you pick this career, you have to be very ambitious and willing to make sacrifices, personal sacrifices. What it meant to me then was pretty much everything, because I had to cancel trips and vacations. And I wrote in this Vogue piece that I sent you. I mean, I left my own birthday party in Peru to go cover an earthquake in Chile. I mean, that's commitment.
That's pretty
I think
intense.
what it
Yeah,
meant for
yeah.
me later, yeah, that is what it meant for me later is I mean, um, I have this romantic and old-fashioned idea of what journalism is, and it might not really actually be a reflection of what journalism has become. Um, I really think that it's there to shed light on human stories. It's there also to expose corruption and hypocrisy among political leaders, which there's a lot of. And so I have this kind of romantic, you know, all the president's men, you work in huddles and you 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 educate people and you shed light, you educate yourself, and then you communicate hopefully that knowledge and that news that you've gathered to people watching you or reading you. I think, unfortunately, now with social media, with a lot less fact checking, with a lot more clickbait, and with these populist political leaders who are maligning and um, discrediting real journalists, it's become so toxic and so difficult to do good work against the backdrop of declining ad revenues and massive cuts in staffing and local newspapers disappearing. It's becoming harder and harder to do good journalism. And when you do it, you are then attacked by everyone in the piece or in your reporting who feels like you've not cast them in the best light. Add to that another element, which is this celebrity kind of journalism, I think, where you where people in power are doing their own PR and passing it off as journalistic content. So I think there are lots of things coming together that are making it. I feel bad for a 25-year-old starting out in this career today, because I think it's
Hmm.
becoming harder and harder to do public, because I think journalism is a public service, to do good public service that benefits people.
Tell me about the most difficult story you've ever covered for you personally. What for you was the most hard or the most traumatic or the hardest story that you had to cover?
So professionally, it was the Haiti earthquake, because it was on a scale that was never before seen in terms of deaths. I mean, hundreds of thousands. So it was the kind of hellish, almost post-apocalyptic scenery that you've ever seen. Not a building standing for blocks, you know, dead bodies in the kind of quantities that you didn't think was possible to see in one
Wow.
place. But personally, of course, it was Syria, of course, Aleppo in particular. Even though I wasn't there, it didn't matter really, because you were seeing the images and you were recognizing parts of the old city of Aleppo that are now, piles of rubble. Um, Seeing video, by the way, of it's been proven that video can give you PTSD. There have been studies about that. So young people who are on TV news desks who take in, the raw feed of
Yeah,
war and disaster,
yeah.
it turns out they too can develop PTSD. So the reason I'm saying that is because seeing Aleppo destroyed on video is not easier, I don't think, than being there, because you almost feel more helpless not being there. When you're seeing the earthquake aftermath in Syria on video, if I was there, I'd be useful. I'd be doing something. I'd be reporting on it. I'd be speaking to people. I would feel less helpless. And I think this watching a place you love or people you love suffer from afar is harder than being there. And the same applies to journalism. I think when you're
Hmm. Hmm.
somewhere, when you roll up your sleeves, you're doing the job, you're not processing it, whereas you are
Yeah.
a lot more when you're watching it. So for
And
me
the
personally, the
Syria,
hardest
yeah.
story was Aleppo. Yeah.
Yeah, and the Syria conflict, you were already anchoring your show based out of London, so you were having to commentate footage or give opinion on what you were seeing. That must have been very hard, and keeping your voice steady and your demeanor even must have been a very challenging thing for you.
It is very challenging, but I think one thing people need to understand about anchoring is not um, chatting with a friend. You're in a different mode, and I very rarely become emotional when I anchor, because I have a job to do and I want to inform people and I want to be useful in that way. When you're not anchoring and you're home on a computer and you see the same footage, the same exact footage that you uh, ran on your show 2 hours before, and then you can cry because, it's like a surgeon in an emergency room is not going to start crying. I feel the same sense of responsibility.
Hmm. 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 So let's switch gears and talk about your best story or the one that left the most positive impact on you.
Okay. When you work in news, those are hard to come by.
They're
You
hard,
rarely,
or
you're,
they get submerged, right? They get submerged
yeah.
by the emergency and yeah,
I think I'm trying to think. There are a few little snapshots that come back to me when you ask that question, and they're usually moments in time. So you're
yeah.
reporting on something that's, not very happy, but then a very fun, happy thing happens during that shoot or during that, during your reporting. I remember that once my producer, Shams El Wazir, and I, we worked together for about 10 years at CNN. We were on the road to Baghdad and decided to interview truck drivers who would do the run from Amman to Baghdad and back during the war, because it was the best paid route, obviously, but it was very dangerous because driving from
Yeah,
for it was for good
sure.
reason, well paid.
Yeah, that it was the
So
best
we
paid
we
route.
we
Yeah.
decided to yeah, we decided to do a whole story about the truck drivers driving from Amman to Baghdad and back. And so, Arab culture is wonderful when it comes to hospitality. Everybody knows that, and it's true. Anytime you speak to somebody or stop to interview somebody, they have to offer you tea or coffee or a cookie or whatever. And this one guy on the side of the road insisted. He said, "I have to. Can I make you a coffee?" He was off the side of his truck. There was this water canister that would heat with the heat of from the heat of the engine. And
Yeah.
Shimps and I looked at
Yeah.
each other. We're like, "Oh my god, this is going to be horrible." But just to be
Horrible,
polite, let's
unhygienic, the
do
whole
it.
thing. Yeah. Yeah.
You name it. Yeah,
Yeah.
pre-COVID, by the way. But anyway, so we stopped and we had that cup of coffee. I take mine sweet. She takes hers half sweet. We drank it and we literally looked at each other and thought, this is the best coffee we've ever had in our lives. How is it even possible? To this day, 15 years later, we talk about it. Things like, for instance, in Gaza, once I did a story on women who had relearned the art of stitching Palestinian embroidery because their husbands were either dead or in prison. Now, the premise is horribly depressing.
Depressing. Yeah.
But then it depressing, but it became the most beautiful story and education about the ancient Palestinian art of embroidery, which many people are familiar with. And that's something that stuck with me. For instance, just the stopping for a moment and doing a story on something just beautiful for the sake of it. Just there's no political angle, it's just let's do 5 minutes on this embroidery stitch. And by the way, you asked me a question
Hmm.
about how things have changed. I could not be doing those stories today. Um, there was a time when there was more, maybe a little bit more money and more effort, just kind of, you could do those long form stories that cost a little bit more. And today those are much, much harder to do. So I feel privileged that I
Yeah.
was a journalist during that time. Yeah.
And I think the two stories you mentioned as having a positive impact are personal interaction stories, right? They're about people's day to day life. They're
Yeah.
about the human connection. And it's always those stories that also resonate with the public, I think, because they get to see a war zone or a difficult situation in a very understandable way, that they can relate to. And I think
Hmm.
those are always the best way to understand whatever community you're trying to talk about. So
Well,
that's interesting.
and the
Yeah, go
father,
ahead.
the father of a friend from Gaza who saw the embroidery story told my friend that he cried when he saw the women embroidering the pillows. Now, you wouldn't expect somebody to cry over
Yeah,
embroidery, but really, I
yeah,
think what you're crying over is your culture, your where you come from, that place that's suffering and going through horrible misery. I think
yeah. It's a
you're crying
sentimentality as
over
well.
where
And
you come
yeah,
from. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
So let's move on in our final section and talk about what you're doing now. The book. You're writing a memoir, a semi-memoir, but it's based on themes, which I found really interesting when you explained it to me originally. So walk us through a little bit why you decided to do the book, how you're doing it, and what are the challenges you're facing with it? What joy has it brought you? Um, Walk us through that a little bit.
It's So I have never written a book, so this is my first attempt. And I didn't know that when you pitch a nonfiction book, you write a proposal, you don't write the whole thing. So you write a few sample chapters and then a breakdown of the book's structure. And then you have an agent usually, and that agent shops it around to editors and publishing groups. And you get loads of rejections and emails about how they don't like it, they don't like the story, it's too similar to something they've published before, they hate your style, who is she, no one knows CNN International here, that kind of thing. But I've heard every excuse. So it's again difficult. But then, someone takes a chance on you and says, yes, let's do this. So I have an American publisher and a UK one, and also Arab language rights for the book, which I'm very happy about, because I really want an Arabic readership to get to hopefully read it. The challenges, I mean, everything is a challenge. Writing itself, writing something you don't think is horrible, sending it then to the editor who says, I don't like this, when you thought it was going to be a home run, that kind of thing. And then the getting to the point where there's something that you've produced, that you've created, that both you, the editor, and everyone else thinks can work. That's the
Hmm.
joy that comes
That's
from
the
it. I
joy
think
of
it's
it.
the hardest thing I've ever done. It's the hardest
Yeah.
thing I've ever done. I will never, ever do professionally anything harder than this. And at the end of the day, it pays nothing. And you're
Yeah,
basically
yeah.
doing, I mean,
But
not nothing, but
it's also probably the first time you're not working you're not in a team. It's you in a room and a computer.
Mm,
That's also
yeah,
probably quite challenging.
exactly.
It's all on you. You're not, yeah.
Although I will say, my mother and I have reconnected on a certain level around this book, because it's organized actually in locations. So there are 10 parts to it, and each part is a city. So it starts with Aleppo, then it goes to Paris, then it goes to Washington. And so each city is its own little world, and it jumps back and forth in the timeline. So, because there are parts of the book that talk about my family history, I have interviewed my mother over many months. She's used my grandfather Asad Gorani's book as a reference as well. He wrote his biography. He was a minister in a few governments uh, during the post-colonial period, not after this,
Pre-Assad.
not pre-Assad. It's important to note
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
So we've kind of so it's been collaborative in some ways. So I haven't always been alone, and those have been
Hmm.
the best moments, I think.
Hmm. Hmm. And what have you learned about the bigger themes like identity? Did it did it answer questions for you, or have you not reached that point yet? Are you still mired in the nitty gritty of it and the structure, or are you able to kind of look at the bigger picture and think about what have you learned in the themes of what you're writing?
I'm still, I don't know yet. I mean, I'm still that person who is born in Seattle, moved to St. Louis, moved to Algeria, moved to Paris, moved back to Washington to live with my dad, with Syrian parents, raised in a French and American culture, living now in London, married to a German. I'm still all over the place. And I'm starting to wonder if it really matters in a way. Why is it that we always want to find answers to questions like, who am I? What is my identity? Can your identity simply be a patchwork of many things, and home is where you're with your family and your loved ones? Or do we really need to find answers to those questions to feel completely content? I think for me, the jury is still out on this question. I think the fact that I'm writing the book tells me that there's more exploring I need to do, and that maybe some of the hurt and feelings of exclusion that I felt as a younger person and in my career, maybe those feelings don't come from the fact that I come from several places. Maybe they come from my own feelings of inadequacy. Maybe I'm pinning on that some of the failures or rejections that I've had, but maybe I'm
Sure,
not.
sure,
I don't know. So
sure, sure.
it's an interesting intellectual
Yeah,
exercise.
for sure. So I had a question here, which you just answered, is where do you feel most at home? And is it a place or who you are with? And you've just, you know,
I
I'm
don't know.
interviewing. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Listen,
yeah,
here, let me tell you, this is something that's just a running joke in my family. So
yeah, yeah.
whenever I move to a place or buy a house, which is,
That's where you're
if I
from.
had more money, believe me, would be happening a lot more than it does. After 2 years, I want to move because I've
Right.
decided that this isn't the place, that this isn't. I finished decorating. I'm done.
I'm
I don't like
done.
this
Time to move
neighborhood.
on.
Look at yeah, there's the neighbors. What is that fence they put up? And my husband is going crazy because every year or two I start looking at ads online about other places we could live,
Yeah.
selling this place. Now that I don't have my salary, that's out of the question, by the way. But anyway, but
But
and then I start
also,
looking
now
at
that
other
you're not working
cities, and I'm
full
like, should
time
we
in a
move to
studio,
Paris?
you you could live anywhere, right? You could be anywhere in the world now, right?
Well,
Technically,
I could. Well, I still have my husband to. He still
to
has a job,
consider,
thank goodness.
to consider.
Yes, exactly. But it's this running joke where after 2 years, everywhere we go, I start looking to the next place. And to me, this is an indication that I do not feel settled yet. I don't feel at home anywhere. The closest thing to home is my mother's apartment in Paris because she and my stepfather Amr have lived there since 1987. So it's the longest I've ever known a single location.
Yeah,
I've,
and a
I've, I've
family
ever,
home, right? Yeah,
had an attachment
yeah,
to a single location. Exactly. So if I go there and the boulangerie and the street and the pharmacy, it's all the same shops that have been there for 40, 50 years. That's maybe where I feel most at home in a physical sense. Emotionally, I think obviously
yeah, yeah.
that's still
I,
undecided, TBD.